Hello and welcome to the Supernatural Fandom Track here at Continual. I'm your host, Gail Martin, and today we are talking about patterns and dances, those recurring behaviors that get in the Winchesters' way an awful lot of the time over the course of the season. But before we dive into that, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Susan.
Okay, thank you so much for having me once again. I'm Susan Nylander. I teach English at a beautiful little oasis in the high desert of California called Barstow Community Hospital. My goodness, that's where my mind is at right now. College, Barstow Community College. Thank you. I have also been had an opportunity to write and edit in a collection of essays with my writing partner, Mandy Taylor, Death and Supernatural. And I'm very grateful that Gail gave us a chance to talk about death and grief and the essay collection. Lynn did our afterword, and so it's wonderful. Thanks so much for having me here again.
Happy to have all of you. Travis.
Hi, I'm Travis Adams. I am a social worker. I specialize in working with veterans with PTSD from their experiences in the military. I also served in the military for about 10 years. And I've contributed to a series of books under the Sterling Publishing with Dr. Travis Langley, to include Supernatural Psychology, Roads Less Traveled.
Great. Lynn?
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a professor at Winchesters University in Philadelphia. Is that audio really weird, or is that my audio that's weird? Sorry, Gail. Tell me if it's bad.
I think you're good.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, and a professor at Winchesters University. I've written, I think, 6 books, maybe 7 books on Supernatural. The most recent ones were written with the cast and the fans of Supernatural about why the show is so special to us. Those are Family Don't End with Blood, and about the show's ending, There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I'm happy to be here too. Thank you, Gail.
Angela.
I'm Dr. Angela Peterson. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I have private practice. I work with individuals who are struggling with anxiety, PTSD, as well as depression. And my specialty area is addiction. And I've just been a Supernatural fan for a few years now. I'm grateful to Travis for the introduction, but I've had the opportunity to be on a few different panels at different Comic-Cons talking about various cast and interesting favorites that go on with our cult TV shows, and Supernatural fits in nicely with that. So very excited to be here today.
Awesome. I'm Gail Martin and Morgan Bryce. I write epic and urban fantasy as Gail, and urban fantasy, male paranormal romance as Morgan. But all the modern worlds are ones where Sam and Dean could walk in and feel right at home. I was very happy to be asked to write a chapter in There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I'm also a regular staff writer for the Winchester Family Business blog. So yes, I've fallen down the rabbit hole and have not found the bottom yet. But let's get to the topic of the day, which is patterns and dances. The Winchesters, all of them, go round and round and round with some behaviors that never seem to make things better, but it takes them a long time to catch on that maybe there's another way to do this. And that's really what I meant by the title for today's panel, or what are those recurring behaviors that become learned patterns? And what are those dances that people engage each other in that make it very difficult for either person to step back and go, hey, wait, maybe we could do this a different way. And that, of course, happens a lot in family systems. One of the first ones I want to throw out there is kind of fundamental to a lot of the show, and that's secrets and lies. The boys, John, Mary, keep a lot of secrets, usually to protect the other person, and it just never seems to go well. what do we know about those kinds of patterns and dances when it comes to that? Travis?
We a lot of times what I found with some of the people I work with is that they try to avoid these topics. They try to avoid having these conversations they feel is going to be tough. They don't know how to be vulnerable and bring up these things such as like, hey, I don't feel safe. Or because we get these stigmas in us. So I'd rather hide, avoid, and lie about it than to face it head on. And we see this with Sam and Dean so often that Charlie calls them out on it. You know, that's even mentioned at the end of the fanfic episode. Like, hey, we need to have the BM scene because of that, because the boys need to learn that they need to have conversations. I mean, even in the French Mistake, they say, yeah, good luck cutting that part out of the episode. You deal with the fans when you don't get the boys sitting on the back of baby.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, their conversations aren't trivial. It's like, hey, I let an angel possess you, or, oh, by the way, I sold my soul. I mean, these aren't just, I ran out of gas or I maxed out the credit card.
Yeah.
Lynn?
I mean, yeah, the things that they have to come clean about eventually are usually gigantic things that, in all fairness, I think probably all of us would struggle with. Hey, I let an archangel possess you. Hey, I stabbed your ex-girlfriend to death. I mean, these are kind of big things. So I do want to cut them a little bit of a break. I mean, I think it's interesting, you know, John and Mary really did set up from the very beginning that keeping secrets was a family tradition. Like, this is all Sam and Dean have ever known. Mary keeping the fundamental secret of being a hunter from John, and then we learned that she went back to hunting behind his back. John keeping all kinds of things secret from Sam and Dean, even the existence of a hunter network that could have helped them, so that they were incredibly isolated. So I actually think they do a fairly decent job as the show progresses in moving away from that and actually opening up to each other more, and to some other people more. I mean, John certainly didn't encourage them to trust anyone but each other. You know, he really left that, like, you're all that you have. And that insularity, while it makes for very good television and very compelling television in real life, is not actually a great idea. And they were able to trust a limited number of people and be at least a little bit honest with some other people as time went on. And certainly by the finale, they were being very honest with each other. So at least there was some progression. And I think oftentimes that's the way it goes. I mean, we all learn these patterns of behavior. Some of them serve us really well, or they serve us really well at a certain time of life. And then later, they don't serve us so well, or maybe they start kicking us in the butt. But I think it's a very hopeful message. People are capable of changing and breaking away from those kind of patterns, at least to some extent.
I loved what you said about them serving well at a certain time, because, you know, there's always that axiom when you look at history that generals fight the last war. They take the lessons from the last war and apply them on the next war, whether or not they fit. And there's a lot of that goes on with the patterns and dances. It might work in one situation, but it might be disastrous to try to apply it to every relationship or situation. And it takes a while to figure that out, usually the hard way. Angela?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really hard, you're right, it does take learning that the hard way. And I think it takes into context how their relationships are set up from the beginning. As I was thinking of the, like, why it's so hard to learn new information, kind of goes back to what I'm saying. It's like, if you have years and years and years of the relationship being that way, so think about how, like, you know, once John has taken the boys on the road to hunt when they are young, you know, and he's, you know, starting to help out, and Sam is like stuck staying back behind. Like, Sam and Dean have this real sense of, like, Dean is the older brother, more knowledgeable, protective, stronger, you know. And so early on in the whole, you know, series, it's really interesting to see that Sam is kind of brings more of the studious knowledge, brings, kind of that extra information, and feels like there's a little bit more of he has to earn being there a little bit because Dean has more of the experience, and just the strength and but that's also because Dean has that very protective sense over Sam. And so I think a lot of the time into new situations along the way it's going, there's more of that same Dean can't protect Sam, or Sam doesn't need to be protected. And sometimes it needs to be the other way around, Sam, helping Dean when Dean's possessed, and coming to get him. So that's actually one of my favorite parts of the whole series, actually. But yeah, that I think that's kind of it, is that you sometimes get caught in these new situations. You're oh, but I've done it this way for so long. And then it doesn't work.
Well, yeah, that becomes a central argument from season 1 on to, Dean, I can carry my weight. You don't have to wrap me in bubble wrap. I have skills. I'm here to protect you too. It takes a long time to get that message through. Susan?
Absolutely. I think that that's one of the key things we see over and over and over, is that Sam keeps trying to grow up. He keeps trying to change. He keeps trying to move forward. And Dean really, and I love Dean, don't get me wrong, but I think Dean is primarily the driver of most of these patterns. And I think it's because of the way they were raised and how Dean is set up as, by John, as this is the way you keep your brother safe. This is the way you hunt. This is the way you do what you do. And one of my favorite lines, way back in the first season, kind of leads to this, where when Sam finds out that Dean had told Cassie, he says, "You told her the big family secret. We do what we do and we shut up about it." And no, he says, "All I did was lie to Jessica for 2 years. And you know this chick for 6 months, and you told her." And so I think the idea of these betrayals happens a lot, of you stepped out of our agreed upon way of being. And as the non-psychologist in this group, all I can really look at is the a close reading of the visual text and what these patterns are. And so those are the kinds of things that I see. And again, I think Dean is the driver of these patterns most of the time, and Sam is the one who keeps trying to break them, but gets sucked back into doing things the way they've always been done. So I think that, again, yeah, you're right with the secrets and lies, and the having to maintain a certain level of secrets is really vital for a lot of what they do. But then when they start keeping them from each other, that's when things get real problematic. So yeah, I think that it takes them a long time to break through that. But yeah, I think we're all happy at the end when they could actually break some of those.
Well, and we see early on that when Sam does try to be honest with his old friends from college, it doesn't turn out well. And Dean's kind of like, "I told you, this is how it's got to be." And so, as Lynn said, in their defense, they really never were brought up around anybody normal for any kind of another pattern.
Right.
Yeah, and when Bobby tries, he gets in trouble, right?
Mhm.
While Susan was talking, it kind of made me think about the very first episode when you really get introduced to Dean. He talks about, saving people, hunting things, the family business. And this is just what their whole life is wrapped around. And by lying to people, by hiding things, they have these patterns, right? The whole thing we're talking about, but because they're effective in certain places and certain times. And then they get kind of validated because, hey, listen, I'm doing the right thing. And then they realize that they stop doing it to themselves and start continuing the same pattern that is maladaptive in those cases.
I was really struck. I'm in the middle of a rewatch, a series rewatch now. So we're going very slowly. We're only on season 2, episode 12. But it struck me that in that time period, in the first third or half of season 2, Dean breaks that pattern of secrecy in a really, really big way by telling Sam what John told him. And John explicitly wanted Dean to keep that a secret. And, you know, that's so powerful for Dean. And yet he realizes, this is killing me to keep this from Sam. I have to tell Sam that our dad told me I might have to kill him because it's eating him up. So even early on, even in season 2, before it's halfway over, even Dean, who I agree with Susan, he is the one who he had more time for this really to be ingrained in him. And he insulated Sam a little bit from it, but he's already pushing back against John's keep secrets, keep secrets, keep secrets. He doesn't want to do it from Sam. And he's always uncomfortable when he has to, even, you know, like the Gadriel thing, he did it. I understand why he did it. It ate him alive that entire time. So I don't think he's as comfortable with it as maybe John was. He absorbed it, but he also is aware that it's really not good for them. And that's like a tension that plays throughout the entire series, which I think is really interesting for 15 seasons long.
Yeah, but you also see him when he's super confident, pretending to be wildlife or an FBI or cops, and even like challenging Sam on that first episode, right? With the woman in white, like, hey, no, this is it. You just got to go in confident. You got to do it. And then fixing Cass when he flips his badge upside down. And so again,
yeah, he's comfortable doing it with anyone but Sam.
Yeah.
He even tells Sam, you know, I don't like lying to you. It doesn't feel right. You know, he acknowledges that later on too. So so you're right. He does. If he's going to break that pattern with anybody, it is going to break it with Sam. You know, he wants to have a different relationship with Sam, I think, than even with anybody else. Even with Lisa, you know, he kept trying to protect her by not telling her. You know, he shows up as a vampire, and so, you know, he doesn't tell her why she needs to stay away, why Ben needs to stay away. He doesn't tell her, I'm freaking dangerous right now. So you know, I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. He just sets it up like he's the same old Dean, but he isn't.
Well, and Sam certainly kept his share of secrets as well. We got to see a little bit of even early Sam hiding that SAT book in his duffel bag in one of the season 15 episodes that was a flashback. And you got the impression he wanted to tell Dean, but he knew what would happen if he did. And it takes Dean a long time to forgive Sam for keeping the secret about applying to Stanford. The whole thing with Ruby, you know, every time I rewatch those seasons, I keep thinking, what would have happened if Dean had said, screw it, I'm uncomfortable with this, but you're calling the play and I'll back your play. Ruby never could have gotten between them. And instead, the judgment and all of that led to more secrets, more lies, then more distrust, and round they go. Angela, it looked like you were going to say.
Yeah, I was like, that was a really hard, like those first, 5 years or so, I think it's pretty realistic. And that was one of the things that I really liked about the show in general, is that I think they did a really great job capturing how difficult it can be to work through things in families, especially when you have a specific dynamic like theirs, which is between two siblings, one's older, one's, younger. There's clearly a lot of stuff that happened before we start the two of them, and there's clearly this tension. There's all kinds of just kind of unspoken stuff we don't know. So I think they did a really fantastic job in this first seasons of like pulling in bits and pieces of the past. And because so much of it is that like there is some mistrust there for a lot of reasons of things that happened before. You know, of things like that, where Sam was like, I want out of this and I don't know how else to do it other than to get out. And I don't feel like I could tell you that because of how things are between us. And so I'm just going to go, you know, which to Dean was kind of an abandonment of all of those, like the values of the family and what they all stood for. And that kind of thing is really hard to work through. And so you don't like most families, it's not like they just sit down and have that, like, let's just sit down and have to talk and like work it out till we work it out. You see it over the process of some years through different situations where it's triggered and then they have to talk about it, or they don't talk about it because it won't, you know, and it just causes more tension until they have to. So I thought that whole thing with Ruby and Sam really struggling with that and hiding it from me had so much to do with just the, like, this is the pattern. I can't tell you things like this that are really important to me or that I'm having a hard time with. People will not respond well to it, and that should make it worse. So I won't. And in the end, it still unfolds in a very difficult way.
Very much so.
I was just going to say, Dean wasn't around when he really got sucked into the Ruby thing. So I think had Dean not been in hell for that amount of time, maybe it wouldn't have gotten to that point with Ruby. I'm not sure.
Well, and I think both times when Dean was in hell and when he was in purgatory, Sam wasn't completely upfront about how much it affected him. It was more so about being in hell. You get the impression that he was really on the edge of checking out when Ruby gave him a purpose. But he never really says that after the purgatory issue. And I think with the way Dean devalues himself, it would be very hard for him to imagine that Sam couldn't just pick up and go on without him, which is not the truth. So again, they're just not connecting. Which leads to a lot of ways they avoid discussion by walking out, picking a fight, deflecting, denying, or just throwing themselves into the fight to be too exhausted to talk about anything when they get home and get done with doing the stitches. What about those avoidance behaviors and how those become patterns in dancing?
I just have to also add Dean turning up the radio.
Yes, I can't hear you.
Headphones, yep.
Very much. Literally, I can't hear you. Lynn?
I mean, this takes me back to what Angela said a minute ago. One of the things that I really love about the show is it is a completely unrealistic show about the supernatural, and yet it is one of the most realistic shows about human relationships that I have ever seen. I mean, those are what we all do, maybe on a much smaller scale, but we all do those exact same things. And the beauty of having a show that's stretched over 15 seasons is that the show had the luxury of not having to resolve those things. Like, they could let those issues play out over a period of years and not a lot of progress get made, because that's how it is in real life. You know, you don't go to therapy one time and the therapist says, oh, look, here's the pattern that you're doing. And everybody goes, oh, okay, I won't do it anymore. I mean, we all wish that's how it would go, but that's not how it goes. So I love that they continue to fall into these patterns for the entire run of the season, starting with the very first episode. You know, the driver picks the music, shotgun shuts his cake hole, be quiet, no tick flick moments. Like, Dean has all these ways of trying to protect himself from things he doesn't want to hear. There is evolution throughout those 15 seasons, but it goes in a really realistic and slow way. And I just really love that. I know that there are people who were frustrated with the show, that there wasn't sort of more change or more evolution, but I think that's one of the best things about it. It's just, you know, wouldn't it be great if that's how it happened in real life, but it doesn't. And I like that. I think that makes it much more powerful when the evolution does happen.
Angela?
Yeah, it's absolutely. Even thinking about Dean and how he approaches avoidance from the beginning, and his very specific tactics. That's the thing, is that everybody avoids some things in their lives. Everybody has some things that trigger them wanting to avoid. And so just watching what Dean's are and what he uses to be able to do that, of like, there's drinking and there's plenty of like, oh, check out that lady, and or just like, we're not going to talk about feelings, like, and where he gets to at the very end, I'm even thinking about when that very last conversation with Cass, for like the Dean at the beginning of that whole thing, would have checked out in some way or another, or I think would have done something very differently with the heaviness of that particular conversation. And he was able to stay with it, wait or to get out, or make a joke or something along those lines. He stayed with it. And so that's I think Lynn's absolutely right. That is not something that is very easy to do over time. And so I think over time, yeah, you got to see the realistic folding of what that can look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, Dean even says at one point, we'll just shove it down until it comes out in bursts of violence and alcoholism. I mean, he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Sam sulks and Dean drinks and goes to the bars. I mean, they've got their patterns. Susan, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that again, Lynn and Angela are right about the way that it unfolds in a length of time, that they don't resolve things week to week, like a lot of shows used to do, where, oh, everything's fixed now. They really do a great job of that. And there's only been, well, the only one I can think of off the top of my head, and then they were doing a hunt, was when they sat down with the shifter who was trying to get them to feel their feelings, and they displayed, here they are in a therapy session, and yet they are all continuing that, where Sam wants to have the conversation. Dean shuts it down because it's part of the job or whatever it is. And then of course, poor Jack is, right in the middle of that. So even when they do have a therapy session, it doesn't go as what the therapist would have liked. Obviously. So
I loved how that went from role playing to real so fast.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, Sam is so poignant in that scene where he's talking about, that you had this relationship that I never had. And because even when Mary comes back and Sam wants to have that, but then Mary up and leaves again. So it's, the idea of that, it does, the wall comes down immediately from where they're playing a role to, yeah, this is the real conversation that, certainly Sam has been wanting to have, but he didn't want to hear it.
Yeah. Travis?
Yeah, what Lynn said and then what Susan said kind of bookend almost the whole series, right? Like the way no chick flick moments and all that stuff at the beginning. In the middle, they have that type of interaction with the shifter, and then towards the end, Dean's running therapy for Lucifer and God or Chuck, right? Let's start with I statements type of stuff. So that I always loved, but you get to see the progression and as he grows. But the thing I think is important about these deflections, these avoidance tactics, is that we do them because they work in the short term. And in the short term, we feel really good about avoiding it, not dealing with it, going to punch somebody in the face, get in a fight, go hook up with somebody, get drunk and become our alter egos, and do things like that. Long term never benefits us. But these guys also live their lives in short-term bursts because they live in a world where they're constantly hunting, and killing, and can be killed by anything, including a random steak.
Well, and unlike most people, though more so recently, they're in a constant state of crisis. And sometimes the applications that get you through an unusual crisis don't work every day. But most people only have limited periods of crises. For the boys, life was just one big crisis split up into chapters.
Yeah, and then we tell ourselves like all these terrible things are facts. And we have to really challenge them. And that's why I do with some of my clients is like, is it a fact or is it a habit that you believe is a fact, right? Is it a fact like the sun rises in the east or sets in the west? Or is it some people are assholes, but not all people? And it comes down to like those type of little differences and on that self-talk.
Yeah, it's a great point. Well, one of the other things that comes up with these patterns and dances, really for both boys, is just often a complete lack of boundaries. And again, whether that is shoving an angel into your brother to heal him, or breaking the world to get the mark of Cain off his arm. Boundaries, folks, boundaries. And if you grow up in the backseat of a car together, that's going to be tough. Didn't even have their own rooms. But anything to add about the whole boundary piece to these patterns and dances, Angela?
Yeah, I think that's a great, it's a great piece of all of what we kind of started with, the lies, secrets. I'm like, that's, so I think you're absolutely right to kind of go back into the, how were they raised? The whole premise of their life just being like, we have this above and beyond thing that we are doing, from practically birth when it comes to Sam. That makes it so that they're constantly in chaos. And I think part of the issue around the boundaries is that it's about survival, their dependency on each other and being open with each other, or needing to know they could trust each other or back each other up in any situation because their lives are on the line. That's a specific type of trust boundary of I know you're gonna save me, or I'm gonna save you, no matter what. All this other stuff sometimes is a little wishy-washy. And so I think you have that kind of extreme leader of when you are really relying on each other to survive. That would kind of stretch your ideas of what boundaries are supposed to be or not, or even realizing that there are types of boundaries, like physical boundaries, emotional boundaries. And so they didn't get socialized to any of that at all. So it is interesting to watch how they do it as they're going through with each other, with anyone else who comes along. Just no boundaries when it comes to keeping each other alive, and that kind of slips out into everything else sometimes.
They were raised a little feral, that's for sure. Susan?
It also, if we're talking about boundaries, again, Gail, you brought in, Dean shoving an angel into his brother to save his life. And that comes back later when he said, you'd have done the same thing. And Sam says, no, I wouldn't. And it's he's talking about the fact that he would have respected Dean's autonomy. And I think really that's what it comes down to is the autonomy and the agency that Sam craves his whole life, because he was told all of his life, he was always the little brother. He was always told, get in line. And Dean was the good soldier, Sam not so much. And so I think I think that craving for autonomy has been a big part of what Sam struggles with to get Dean to understand.
And Dean really doesn't understand it until Michael takes him over. I mean, that's the unfinished sentence, which would have gotten rid of half of season 9 if they'd have just let Sam finish his sentence.
Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Although interestingly, Sam says later, he kind of takes that back. He says, I didn't mean that. I mean, I think Sam's boundaries are, he struggles more with the fact that he doesn't have much boundaries when it comes to Dean. He struggles with it more, but I think his boundaries are pretty much every bit as messed up as Dean's are. I mean, I think Don really, that was his way of keeping them safe, right? You can only depend on each other. It's just the two of you. There's no one else in the world, not even other hunters. You can't trust anyone else. How could they ever be expected to have anything like normal boundaries? I mean, he literally didn't want them to, so that they could stay alive. And so they struggle with that their entire relationship. Like, how can we have boundaries and still keep each other safe? How can we continue to do what is the most important thing to us, but also allow each other some autonomy? Like, how does that work? And I think that's a really common struggle that anyone who's attempting any kind of intimacy is going to struggle with. The whole idea of interdependence and dependence and autonomy, it's a continuum, right? And people are always struggling with where those lines should be. One of the things I was thinking about was doing an episode review of one of the ones that I just watched. And while in the beginning, certainly Dean is very much, I don't want to talk about emotions, at least on the outside, he is extremely tuned into Sam's emotions, and Sam is extremely tuned into his emotions from the moment they reunite. Like, they never really they got physical distance when Sam went away. They never really got emotional distance, and they don't throughout the entire series, really. Like, even when, you'll see Dean making stupid jokes, but it's because he's always keyed into when Sam is upset. He always knows how his brother's feeling. There's a kind of hypervigilance there that keeps them very closely tied together, because they're always worrying about the other's mental state. And they're very good, both of them, at knowing what to do to sort of emotionally take care of the other brother. This is the most complex relationship, I swear to God, that has ever been depicted on TV. And I am endlessly fascinated by it, even 15 years later when I'm watching season 2, just being like, oh, I see what Dean's doing there. I don't even know if I got that when I was watching it, 13 years ago. I see it all so clearly now as a pattern that never really goes away. But it's really quite fascinating.
Well, and Sam picks up on so many of Dean's nonverbal cues. Like when Dean's going to go on his farewell tour and put himself in the Malik box, Sam knows just from the way Dean hugged him that there's something wrong. And he's already in the car by the time Mary calls him. And he says, well, I knew something was wrong. He hugged me. Don't you hug? Not unless the world's ending. Not like that, And so, yeah, there's definitely a resonance there. Travis?
Yeah, it makes me think about the British Men of Letters episode towards the end of that season when Sam gives his speech. And Dean sits back, he's like, I see the man you would have been. You are the leader. Like, you're a great hunter. Or even in season 15, when he's talking about like all the ghosts getting released from hell, and he's just like, us versus them, I like our odds. Boundary setting, kind of what Andrew was talking about, growing up in the back of baby, doing these things, but having complete and utter trust in so many aspects of their lives, except for the vulnerability pieces, really, right? Because no chick flick moments. That's really what it comes down to. And so those 2 episodes really speak to me when you get to see Dean and Sam, and Dean looking at Sam from a different point of view at times and seeing how great of a hunter he really did become.
And of course, the finale is just an episode of chick flick moments. So the evolution in no chick flick moments to let's just have an episode of chick flick moments is pretty striking.
It's a pie festival. Let's go.
Even from the beginning, Dean says no chick flick moments, but can you name another series with badass action heroes who spend nearly as much time crying? I mean, both of these guys.
Yeah, and doing the brother moment over the car. I mean, they talk a good game, but that's what I mean. They are very emotionally intimate from day one, even though they would like you to believe that's not the case at all.
That was what I absolutely adored about the fanfic episode, was that they showed like watching them in the like on the stage show where they're just like, oh yeah, I guess it was like, Yeah, there it is, the realization that that's what actually happens, and that that's such an important and necessary part of their relationship.
I think that is something that's kind of fun with the supernatural fanfic that's written, is in a lot of cases, especially in the fix-it ones, like things like, well, whatever did happen with the voicemail, you've basically got authors woman-splaining what the guys were really thinking and should have said. And it's kind of, it's really fun, you know, it's that little missing piece that if they could have put it into words, this is what they might have said and probably should have. But, you know, where we usually get mansplaining, we get a lot of woman-splaining, I think, with the fanfics. Well, folks, we have run through our time so quickly again. And, you know, it's a 15-year show. We could keep talking forever. But thank you so much for this. Before we go, let's have everybody go around and please let everyone know where they can find you, starting with Angela.
Oh gosh, I was just thinking, I was like, where can you find me? You can find me on Instagram, Dr. _ Angela Renaissance Woman.
Awesome. Lynn?
You can find me pretty much on all social media at Fangasm SPN. My website is fangasmthebook.com, and you can find my latest books at peacewhenyouaredone.com.
Very nice. Travis?
I'm on Twitter. I don't use it as much, but it's the Marine_Peer, PEER.
And Susan?
I am on Twitter. It's Suze105, SOOZE 105. And don't forget, Death and Supernatural. It's on Amazon and at McFarlane. Happy to, you know, plug the book. But yeah, mostly on Twitter.
I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. Social media is all a variation of those, so if you spell them right, you'll find me. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook, but mostly I'm on the Supernatural fandom track and the Winchester family business, so I'm pretty easy to find. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for some wonderful insights into the patterns and dances. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up, so we'll see you online.